job making you cry or laugh, we're not doing our job, right? Okay. Or pissing you off. That's the new how to manage. Okay. So keeping your cool when the heat is on, finding refuge in the shade. So as the temperatures heat up outside, which it's going to be 90 today, and there are absolutely no clouds in the sky. So we're going to feel that physical heat. And but what I want to take a look at today and for the rest of this month is what do we do? How do we keep our spiritual cool when the heat is on? And I don't know about y'all, but I've had a really hot week. So maybe you're going through some stuff too, you know, health issue, a relationship problem, a job problem, a betrayal, a fear, a failure, a success that freaks you out, trouble with a job, a deep loss, a health crisis, you name it. But whatever it is, when you're in the middle of it, it's uncomfortable, right? Big time. And you feel like you might explode, right? And sometimes you do. Yeah. And it kind of feels like you're in the center of a firework, you know, a little firecracker or something. You know, we just had the 4th of July. That was my birthday. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was one of the worst ones I've ever had. But that's okay, you know, because it's over. So, and I felt like a little firecracker, and I am a little firecracker. I think that's why God had that joke on me, right? So, how do we keep our cool, okay, when the heat is on, when that sun is high and hot in the sky and the thermostat is rising? A lot of times what we'll do is we'll go find refuge in the shade, right, to get out of that heat. And what happens when our lives heat up is we might also want to take refuge in or revert to that inner place in the shade, otherwise known as our dun 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 shadow side. I need like one of those guys like no, not on the radio. You know, like the comedians have with that play the stuff according to what they feel and think and everything. I need one of those. You need a rim shot. Yeah, that would be good. Yeah. So the term shadow, I'm sure y'all are familiar with it. It was first used by Carl Jung to describe the repressed and the denied part of the self. And then Robert Bly wrote a book, popularized this whole idea, and it was called A Little Book on the Human Shadow. And I know that in New Thought circles, we don't like to talk about this. We don't really like to talk about that aspect of ourselves, but it's really important that we gain an understanding of this so that that radiant light that is our true self can shine in all kinds of weather, even when every button and nerve on you is being pushed, right? And so that's the way we become whole. If it's just light or if it's just shadow, it's got to be everything. Because let's face it, there is no light without darkness and no darkness without light, right? Okay. Now this is why I chose, or Michael and I chose Someone You Don't Love Today. Because isn't it true that, let's see if this works today. This would be really cool. That our shadows side, we don't let others see that. But the ones we love the very most, right? They're the ones that get to see the shadow. And then we put on this little happy mask and we go out into life, and to all those strangers, we're just as loving and kind and generous and sweet as can be. And, you know, why that song is so poignant, you know, because it speaks a spiritual truth. Brené Brown says that only when we're brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. And so today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to dive deep this morning. And I've wanted to talk with you all about this for a very long time, but you know, everything has its moment. And sometimes you just have to wait and be patient until that moment arrives. And it was birthed this week out of the darkness. And that's the beauty of a dark night of the soul experience, right? So let's dig in. The ego, yep, I'm going to talk about the ego today, okay, is terrified of the truth. And the truth is that the ego doesn't really exist at all. And we're going to talk about what that means. So let me just give you a framework from which to sort of, because there's a lot of information and it's very dense, and so I want to give you a framework to understand what we're talking about today. So the ego, which is, okay, this is obviously not working, so Mary, you are just going to have to read my mind, okay. All right, the ego, its job is to preserve the illusion of this small, separate self. It is fighting for its life because this is how it keeps the dream, which you call your life, and your character, which is you, alive. And it does this by what I like to refer to as bops, and that just helps us remember it a little bit. Fred Davis coined that. And bops are beliefs, opinions, points of views, and stories. Bops. The beliefs are habitual thinking that you think and you believe over and over and over again until it solidifies and becomes more solid as a belief, and it gets real sticky like Velcro. Opinions are basically, I'm right because, and then this is how you make sense of your world and what's happening in it. And you also get others to try to agree with you because that makes you feel even safer. But it's an illusion. And then there's the points of view, which is basically, if you didn't get it the first time, I'm right. And here's why. And then you've got the stories of your life, which are the events, the information, the happenings in life that you interpret to support all of your bops. Does that make sense? Okay. See, the ego is not a thing. All it is a circular pattern of thinking. That's all it is. And all of those bops forms your identity, your identities, okay? Because most of us have more than one. So let's take a look at the identities. The identities are the roles you play, the images, the image of yourself that you hold near and dear. It's the character in the dream. And this is formed from conditioning, from how you grew up, and also the collective consciousness, and also your own family dynamics, your DNA, your ancestral, and then the stories and the events of your life and how that interpretation happened. And you believe those things over and over again from this habitual thinking patterns. And so some of the roles, I mean, some really obvious, simple ones are, you know, I'm a woman, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I'm a wife, I'm a musician, I'm a minister. That's the first generation of belief, okay? Now, what happens, a good way to inquiry with this is, you know, I am a woman. That's first generation. Second generation would be, I'm a tall woman. I'm a tall, bold, beautiful woman.
Yeah.
Thank you. My ego likes that. You see how we get layers of even more belief. And also, if I am a wife, what that means is, that's my husband, okay? So we're building like layers onto this belief. Now, what holds holds all that in place is the underbelly of all the stories. So let's look at those. So, all right, one of my identities is musician. So I am a musician. Second layer, I'm an accomplished musician. And then the story that holds that in place is all the things that happened in my career where I got recognition, acclaim, position on a chart, people I respect showing me admiration. All those stories, all that stuff is the underbelly that holds up that belief that I am an accomplished musician. Da, 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 da. Okay, so, and what that does, and we all do this is what the ego does, okay? We gotta see it. So, and what it does is it keeps this whole dream going, okay? It keeps the whole dream going. Now, where is all of what I'm talking about going on at? Your head, okay? And this is what I really want to get through to you today, is that all of that stuff, and we're not done yet, I have more, is going on in your head. Your head is not reality. Yeah, your head is crazy, that's right, okay? That's all going on in your head. Pop, 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 all these stories, these identities, this dream, blah, blah, blah. It's not reality. All right, so then, of course, you've got the dream. And the dream is my life. My life. Well, is that true? Is it your life? Is it life? Or is it your life? My body, my husband, my church, my music, my family, my friend, my country. You can go on and on and on. What will start to break through that veil of illusion is when you begin to question some things. Is it true that this is my life? Is that actually true? And then we have a whole defense structure in place to protect the image, the story, and the life. And that's just a few ways that we defend ourselves, okay? Through rationalizing things, we minimize things. It's not that much. We blame other people, it's your fault. We project, we see things in others we don't like, and we don't see that that is us. We complain, we exaggerate, we in denial, don't even know what's going on here, we're just happy. You know, and then it can get to more destructive things where it goes into addictions and all of that. So here's the thing, is that absolutely none of it's real, okay? So if we go to the next one, the ego, the thoughts, the beliefs, the stories, the identities, the characters, the opinions, the points of view, the defenses, and the dream you call your life, none of that is true, and the ego knows it. So you can see that you are up against a mighty foe, right? I mean, when you take a look at all of this, this is, whew, whoa, that's a mighty foe. So our culture teaches us, I want to read from Dark Matters, which is Discovering Wholeness in the Shadows, and it's by a Unity minister named Laura Boyd. And she says that our culture teaches us to fear the experience of the dark, especially that inner darkness that is our shadow self. In fact, we've grown so afraid over the years that we have built an imaginary wall between us and the darkness. We have developed rituals, psychologies, and religions and pills to distract us from the darkness. And yet, in the end, the darkness is always there with us waiting. However, if we learn to step through that fear, there is another possibility, another road less traveled. On this road, we learn to accept the darkness, to engage it in dialogue, and to use it as a tool for our own spiritual growth. On this road, we learn that darkness is not an enemy of the light, but simply the other half of the light. We learn that our goal is not light, but wholeness. Not just light, but wholeness. We learn that true spiritual wholeness is not a denial of the dark side of ourselves, but rather an embracing of the inner light and the inner darkness into an integrated, healthy, transcendent whole. So, Rumi has the most beautiful poem about that called The Guest House, where he says, this being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, right? Welcome and entertain them all. Now, you may be mentally stepping back right now, some of you in protest going, wait just a minute. Now, don't we just here at MCCSL say that we are beings of light and only light? That we are all expressions of the divine, whole, complete, and perfect just as we are? That there is no darkness, just light? And I've said those words. And yes, they're totally and completely true. We're all expressions of the divine, whole, complete, and perfect, just as we are. There is no darkness, only light, in absolute reality. These words are absolutely true. Absolute reality with a big capital R is reality experienced from the perspective, from the perception and the perspective of infinite oneness. And in that, there is only oneness, and we are one with that oneness. In the absolute, we are pure expressions of God, radiant, whole, perfect. There's only good, there's only God, there's only light. And then there's the relative, the little r, okay, like the little self. And this is experienced through our perception and our perceived identity from this human experience. And this reality is experienced through our five senses, through our conditioned responses, through our reasoning, and it's governed by our limited human consciousness. So oneness in the absolute terms, but in the relative, there is duality. There is two-ness, which isn't actually real, but it sure seems like it. Sure seems real. We experience up, down, love, fear, joy, sorrow, good, bad, happiness, sadness, peace, anger, love, hate, light, dark. We are, as Reverend Franklin says so often, spiritual beings having a human experience, so we get to live in both realities, the absolute and the relative. And on this human journey, although the absolute is absolutely true, on this human journey, we experience the false sense of illusion and separation. We experience fear and sorrow and sadness and anger and darkness. And all of those things that Robert Bly said we kind of shove into a bag and throw over our shoulders, and they create this huge shadow that keeps like getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the challenge is it just doesn't stay back there or in the bag, right? It starts spilling out into our relationships and into our work and into our churches and and it can be in small ways or it can be in huge ways, like war, nuclear war, okay? So what I want to do is, I've said this before, that the spiritual journey, the spiritual process, the true one, is not one of accumulating, of getting something. It's actually a very destructive process, and it's a lot of letting go. And so, and this begins the destruction of ego when you get that and you begin doing that work. I love what Adashante says. He says, enlightenment is a destructive process. It has nothing to do with becoming better or being happier. Enlightenment is the crumbling away of untruth. It's seeing through the facade of pretense. It's the complete eradication of everything we imagined to be true. That's why that question that Katie teaches us, Byron Katie, is it true, is so dang powerful. because it's the only way that your mind is going to see that it doesn't know anything for absolute certainty. So the destruction of my ego began in 2011 when I went and spent a month at Turnaround House with Byron Katie and many facilitators. And when I talk about the destruction of ego, I'm not talking about like when your ego gets bruised. I was in the entertainment business as an actress and a musician. Man, I got rejected and put down, and I was just like offended everywhere. I'm not talking about that, because really all that does is puff your ego up more. I'm talking about the real destruction of ego. Because only an ego takes offense. Only an ego takes offense. And I love what Katie says, defense is the first act of war. Okay? So the destruction of ego that I'm talking about is, well, I'll just kind of share a little bit of the story, which is that in this month that I was doing the work there, and it's basically a treatment center, a home, residential for people wanting to do that kind of deep work. And it's where I began to learn all about questioning everything. My thoughts, my beliefs, all the conclusions that I'd made about myself, you, and life. I began to understand how the mind works and recognize the stories and the characters and the patterns, okay? So it was very, very significant in my spiritual growth to have that foundation and that chipping away, kind of like the sculptor, Michelangelo. It's like he's just chipping away at everything that's not that. That's kind of what those facilitators were doing with me. I didn't understand a lot of it at the time, but it was doing its work on me anyway. And it was where I also began to really see some of the more shadowy characters in my psyche, which I'm gonna share a couple of them with you in a minute. And then so that was June of 2011. And then for like the next, up until till June of 2014, I was just on fire for the truth, just on fire. It was all that mattered to me, and it was just this passionate drive that I was not in control of. It was just like driving me, and I was reading. I was studying, I was contemplating, I was writing. I was like a mad woman, okay, for years with this thing. I just had to know, I just had to figure this out. And then in June of 2014, I decided to go another month into another inquiry home situation with my favorite facilitator from Katie's house, who had since quit and then opened up his own thing. And so I spent a month continuing to do that work. And it was there that I had the breakdown. Okay? It was there I had the breakdown. And in his extremely skilled way, his name is Jimbo, and this man has a total gift for just cracking heads and taking no prisoners, okay, which is what this one needed. And he did his job, and after how many years is half a century, like 50? Yeah. Okay, so it, after, half a century or more, I got humble. Truly humble, and I surrendered. Okay? So fast forward a year to the next year, and this is June of 2015. So I had the breakdown. I continued to read, study, all that stuff. I went back for another month. And this time, I had a breakthrough. I didn't even know it at the time that it was, but I found out it was, because it was completely necessary for that to occur in order for a greater insight to happen. But what I saw and what I felt the impact of was my ego. I saw what it looked like. I saw the monster that it was. I felt the impact of that had been who I had been, and that was all that I had been. And between seeing it and feeling it, and I gotta say, the feeling the impact of that, what that did to me and every aspect of my life, was feeling that, was what allowed the breakthrough to happen. Within a month of that, I was back home. I was reading a book about all these people who are waking up. And while I was reading these stories, and it was, they were going through an inquiry process with themselves, and then they would see through the illusion of self. And as I was reading these stories, about halfway through this book, all of a sudden, I got it. I got it. Only I didn't get it, but there was a realization that occurred that was so simple and so obvious and yet so incredibly profound that there was no separate self. And this is what is classically referred to as a spiritual awakening or enlightenment. So 2 years since then, once you see, there's no unseeing it. You know. And so your life becomes about living from that knowing. But here's the thing with conditioning and with the ego, unless you're one of these lucky few, rare people like Byron Katie, where they have their awakening of that, and it is so profound that it blows out all the conditioning, those patterns, those habitual patterns have got to kind of wind down. It's like a fan that's going at full speed, and then you turn it off, and it takes a while for it to stop spinning, right? So the last couple of years has been a time of just that happening and my watching it, and sometimes getting re-identified again, okay? So I want to introduce you to a couple of my characters that helped me break through to this. And, oh boy. All right, here we go. When I was in Turnaround House, this character was introduced to me. And it's the inner terrorist. And if you remember that Batman movie, at the end, when Heath Ledger's character is completely threatened, nothing has worked, nothing's going his way, it's all coming in on him, and then what does he do? He comes in, and he's got his hand on the explosives, and he's like, go ahead, hit me, go ahead. I'll blow myself up and everything with it, okay? This is my darkest character, by the way. And of course, this is personified in like real reality now, right? So that's the inner terrorist. And then the other one I want you to see is the one that happened the month before my seeing. And this character is the queen, okay? Now the queen rules, okay? And the queen can be arrogant, overbearing, controlling, insensitive, self-serving, mean, critical, judgmental, hateful, and if you keep crossing her, off with her head, just off with their heads, okay? And what I saw while I was doing an inventory of my life and these aspects and everything, all of a sudden I had this realization that, and it was horrifying, that, oh my God, that's all that's here. Oh my God, that is all that is here. And the one pretending not to be that. Do you get that? Okay? And the one pretending not to be that, which is actually the same one. And I was like, oh my God, that's all there is to me. That's it. And it freaked me out so bad. I felt like just toxic muck in my stomach. I was horrified. It was like such an ugly monster. And then for days, I was literally like in the bed in this little apartment on this farm out in Lexington, Kentucky, and I was absolutely terrified to ever go outside the door because that was all there was to me. And if I went out that door, she was going to do her thing, and I did not want to hurt anybody anymore. I didn't want to hurt anybody anymore. Not myself, not you, nothing. And this is what I'm talking about when I say feeling the impact. That's what it takes. You can't just see it. You have to feel it. So, so that was what happened that last month at the inquiry. Oh, honey. Oh, God, I cannot tell you how precious this little baby is. She just came into my life at the perfect time. So, okay, so that was like so necessary because when I saw that that was all there was to me, that was not completely true. It wasn't. Really, Margaret? I'm right at the good part. Okay. So it actually wasn't completely true what my realization was, which is like, oh my God, this monster is all there is to me. Because what I saw when I went inside and just kept doing it and doing it and doing it was that there was actually nothing to me. Who looks outside dreams, and who looks inside awakens. And what I awoke to was that there was no self. There was no queen. There was no terrace. There was no nothing. There was nothing. Ain't nobody home, I'm telling you. Seriously, in reality, it's true. And when it is seen that there is no self, there is no more suffering. Now, it doesn't mean there's not pain and irritation and all that kind of stuff, but there's no more suffering because suffering is a psychological suffering that happens to somebody. And when you see that there's no somebody to be suffering, it just all falls away. Because all suffering is caused by believing in separation. Me, you, this, that. There is no you. And when you see that, now you can't just kind of know that we are all one and it's all connected and it's not. I mean, that's good, that's a start, and it's not even enough to go, oh, I feel what oneness is, and I don't feel separate. That's not enough either. You have to look for yourself, and through your own direct experience, see for yourself that there's no separation, that there is no separate self. Now, the moment that you become aware, ego kind of dissolves, because awareness and ego cannot coexist at the same time. And what begins to, this is not a character, but it's kind of part of the process that happens next, which is, this is the witness position. That's the watcher, right? The one that's watching the dream and the characters and the thought patterns and the ego structure and all of that stuff happen. So be the silent watcher of your thoughts and your behavior. It's what the beautiful meditation was about. You are beneath the thinker. You are the stillness beneath the mental noise. You are the peace of God. And so the only really true refuge that there is living as this truth, as living as this knowing. And part of what helps that happen is when you begin to witness your reactive mind trying to take refuge in your shadow self, and just in watching that, it makes the dark conscious, and it makes it welcome, and it makes you whole. What this is, it's a shift in perception. It's a shift in perception from the little me to the big me, okay? From the little self to the absolute. So a good question is, where are you seeing from? Check yourself on that in any moment. Where are you seeing from? And know that what you seek is seeking you. It's as close as hands and feet and breath and heart. Now, anybody here that is new or newer to New Thought may ask, what in the world does all of this have to do with God? It has everything to do with God, because to know yourself is to know God. It's the only way that it happens. And then I'd like to talk a little bit to some of you that have been in this teaching a long time. And there may be some that have taken all the classes, have worked this stuff, have done the deep counseling and the different healing modalities and everything that there is, and you're still suffering. And there's just a discontent that the promise of this has gone unfulfilled. And then I want to speak to those that come here and take classes and start learning about this stuff and start practicing these principles, and it starts working and the life starts changing, and then they go, I got this. I'll see you, thanks. Okay? We got a lot of those in this teaching. Until the shit hits the fan, right? And then they come back and, maybe there's something I missed here, right? And it's not that all of this stuff isn't useful. It absolutely is, until it's not. If it's useful, keep using it. If you've reached a point where it's not, then what it is it's time to dig deeper. There's always more, and there's always further. And it's time to really get to work and to dig deep. And that's why we need each other. And that's why we need community. This is not, you know what you're up against? In your own psyche? I mean, that's a pretty scary deal, okay? And so we need one another. That's what this is for. And what I would also say is that, you know, true teachers become really necessary and important at a certain, always, but at a certain point on your journey, because you need somebody who has navigated this terrain to help. I mean, it's not easy stuff, you know? And so I want you to know that this is where we're going. This is what I'm passionate about. And I just want you to come along if you're ready to, you know, just like kind of dig a little bit deeper. And I just want to close with saying that you are light. And you absolutely are the absolute. And you're living in the relative. And so I just want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes from Wavy Gravy, who says, "We're all bozos on this bus, so we might as well sit back and enjoy the ride." And so it is. Thank you very much. I've been wanting to give this talk for a very long time, and glad it happened. I'll be teaching from this for the next 10 years, so I hope you'll come back. All right, it is now time for our offering and to give back to that which spiritually nourishes us. And I'm going to bring Miss Mary up because this is not my part, I just remembered.